Hello, everyone. It's Sinead Wheelahan here with you today, and Barbara Lamb, of course, is joining us for Barbara School number 12. And today, Barbara's going to be talking about a really, really juicy topic. I'm personally very excited about this one, and I know a lot of you who are listening to Barbara's interviews will also be excited about this because she's going to be talking about her own personal extraterrestrial experiences. And I'm very excited in particular because there's one terrific story that I can't wait to hear her share with you, which is about, oh gosh, I can't even go there. Barbara, you should just dive into it. I was going to tease it a little bit, but it would be giving away too much. So just dive right into it by all means, please. And also, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine, thank you.
Good.
You look like you are too. I hope that that is true.
I
Yes.
am.
Well, good. Well, many of you know that I have been doing regression therapy work with many people who have been experienced extraterrestrial contacts. And I started doing that work in 1991 and never really considered that I personally might have had experiences of that sort, being encountered by extraterrestrial beings. And indeed, I think it's true that I had not had those kinds of experiences. But I was working with so many people who had and continue to do that work even today. And so I certainly have learned a lot about it. But back in 1991, I also became a crop circle researcher. And in 1991, I was working with a woman, doing many regressions with her to her extraterrestrial experiences. And she was also channeling an extraterrestrial being. That was wonderful for me because I got the experience of talking to this being on many occasions over a period of several years.
Oh,
In 1994, at the beginning of that year, this extraterrestrial being, through the channeling, told me that if I wanted to, I could add to my crop circle research. I could add that I would be taken for the making of one of the genuine crop circles. Well, when I heard about that from him in January, I just thought, oh, wow, that's really bizarre. I mean, what a great opportunity, but I don't know if I really would be ready to do that. I don't know. Anyway, I thought about it for several months. And about 6 months later, when I was just about to go to England for my annual crop circle research, the being was channeling again in my office. And I said, I remember that you told me I could be taken for the making of a crop circle. And I have finally decided that yes, I would like to have that experience. What do I do to bring that about? And he said, well, you have to talk to the beings, even if you don't know who they are or what they look like. You can just send out your thought, but talk aloud and convince them that you would like to be taken for the making of a crop circle and that you are ready to do that. So, with that advice, as I was driving to Los Angeles airport in about a 45-minute drive, just in order to catch the airplane to go to England, I was thinking, well, this is my last chance to really talk to them. And without anybody else being around, I was alone in my car. And so for about 45 minutes, I talked out loud to whoever the beings are who were making the crop circles. And I had been so enamored of the crop circles for 4 years already at that time. And I knew that I would be visiting them that summer, again, visiting a lot of them, as many as I could possibly get to. So I knew enough about the crop circles at that point, had been in enough of them, that I really was genuinely enthused and had the sense that I knew what I was talking about, having been in so many of the crop circles. So for 45 minutes, I talked out loud to the beings in my car, and not knowing what they looked like or who they were, but praising them for the wonderful crop circle patterns they make, and praising them for the extra energies that they add to the land in the crop circles, praise them for paying attention to the earth and to giving us these symbols and whatever the goodnesses are about these crop circles. And I was more and more enthused the more I was talking. And then I got to Los Angeles airport and parked the car and took the shuttle and did all the stuff and flew to England. And I was there for about 4 weeks before the last night, before the last day of visiting crop circles that year, 1994. So as I got into bed that night, I was thinking, I don't think that anything like that happened. I certainly wasn't aware of anything unusual. So I asked again to be taken for the making of a crop circle. Then I got into bed and turned out the bedside lamp, and immediately I could see that there were 3 short beings with big heads coming from the area of the window. There was a little bit of night light coming through the window, although the room was dark. So I could just see silhouettes of these beings coming toward me in the bed. And when they were getting close, I sort of opened my eyes, lifted my head a little bit, and they saw that, and then they retreated, all 3 of them, back toward the window. Then I closed my eyes and decided, okay, I better keep my eyes closed so they'll keep coming toward me, because maybe this is it. Maybe I'm being taken for the making of a crop circle, I hope. And so they came closer. I just opened one eye a tiny bit just to see that they were coming, and closed my eyes again. And then I wasn't aware of anything through the night until the alarm clock went off the next morning. And the next morning I got up, and I was with a group of people at a crop circle conference. And we all got into a big double-decker bus and drove about 45 minutes or so, and to look for new crop circles. We happened to drive by a field that I recognized from the day before, because it had 2 big megalithic stones standing in it, and then a brick village behind the end of the field. And so I recognized that field, and there had been no sign of a crop circle in that field the next or the previous day. But on this particular morning, I noticed from the top layer of the double-decker bus that there was a big depression in the wheat in the middle of that field. So I thought, oh, that's probably a new crop circle. So I ran down the stairs from the top deck and told the driver, stop. I think there's a crop circle back there. And he said, sorry, ma'am, I can't stop until we get to the car park. So we went to a parking lot, a car park, just a little bit further down the road. And then I jumped out of the double-decker bus and ran to my friend who was driving a car, a rented car, following us. And I said, I think there's a new crop circle back there. And she said, hop in, let's go. And 2 other ladies happened to hear this, so they hopped in her car also. And we went back to that field that had had the depression in the wheat and walked through the tractor track and out into the middle of the field. And there was a brand new beautiful crop circle. And we knew it was very new because it was glistening and it had a little energetic sound to it. It
Wow.
was like the sound of pouring milk on Rice Krispies cereal, that little snap, crackle, and pop, very subtle, little beautiful sound. And it was full of little droplets of dew as well. So we were the first ones to go into that crop circle. And indeed, it must have been laid down only maybe 3 or 4 hours earlier, we guessed at the most. So we had a wonderful time visiting that crop circle and realizing that it had been impeccably laid down in a series of circles, which formed a circle and then a ring around it.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, that was great. And then we happened to see a picture later in the afternoon, a photo that had been taken of that crop circle from an airplane, which is the very best way to see the design of a crop circle, is to see it from above. You can see the whole thing. So anyway, that in itself was a wonderful thing. I was the one to discover the crop circle, and we were the first 4 people who went into it, and it was an absolute beauty, and we were thrilled with the whole thing. Well, the next day after that, I flew home, and within a week or so of that time, I had one of my regression therapy clients come and regress me to that night when I saw the beings coming toward me as I was getting into bed and turning out the light. And in the regression, it turned out that, yes, indeed, those 3 beings did come to my bed. They levitated me up off the bed. They took me through the corner where the ceiling of the room joined 2 walls. Took me right through that point and out into the air and up into a relatively small UFO craft. So what I was aware of was being lifted up, almost like floated up through the bottom of that ship, and then moved over and placed into a barrel-shaped chair with the 3 beings still behind me. I never did get a good look at them. They didn't say anything to me, nor did I say anything to them. But I was just fascinated with what was happening. So they had put me in this barrel-shaped chair facing frontwards, and there was some sort of a belt that they clicked to hold me securely in. And I noticed that in front of me, by several feet, there were 2 other barrel-shaped chairs, and I could see just the top of the head of a being in each one of those chairs. And they were definitely not human beings. Kind of a grayish looking skin with quite a bit of texture in the skin. And every once in a while, I would see an arm from one of them reaching out and touching a part of the wall in front of them, a big curved wall. And when they would touch it, a little section would light up with a soft red light. And then it seemed like the little craft that we were in would move somewhat or move in a somewhat different direction. So that seemed to be the control mechanism. And so the plane or the craft lifted up and went over a wheat field, and it tipped down so that I could see out the big front window, big curved front window. I could see as it tipped that we were over a wheat field. This craft had some sort of light coming from the bottom of it. So as it tipped, I could see that we were looking down at a wheat crop. So then I thought, oh, good, good. I think it's about to happen. And then I was a witness sitting there in this chair that there was a swooshing noise that came from the middle of the craft and seemed to be going downward, it sounded like. It reminded me of like a fireman suddenly turning on a high powered water hose. That's what it sounded like. I didn't see it because the floor of the craft was between me and what was going on down below. But I could hear that, and it made a swoosh. Then it seemed like the whole craft moved around a little bit, swoosh, around some more, swoosh, all the way around, swoosh, 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 around in a circle. And then it seemed like we just went dashing around in a circle. And I was thinking, oh, I'm the person who hates amusement park rides where we dash around like that. And yet it's happening here, but it only lasted a couple of seconds at the most. And then we stabilized. And then it seemed like the craft reversed its direction. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up with the alarm clock the next morning. So I do not have conscious recollection, even in the regression, of how I actually got back into the inn that I had been staying in and the right room and the right bed, but they did return me to the right place. So that was wonderful. And it turned out that with what I was aware of in the regression of the swoosh, 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 seeming like we were making a circle of these swooshes, that was actually the pattern that I had found in that field and had been one of the first ones to go into. So it all kind of came together. I mean, how perfect that was. And what a lovely experience that was.
Something else.
And I certainly enormous credit to those beings. Now, I cannot prove that that is the way that all crop circles are made, but I certainly am guessing that many, if not all, of the crop circles are made by a small craft. This craft seemed to be only about 20 feet in diameter at the most, maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 feet. And it wasn't terrifically high off the ground. I would guess maybe 50 feet, 75 feet or so above the top of the growing crop. But it was really a lovely experience.
That's something else.
Since I had not had experiences before then, that was probably all that I would ever have in terms of extraterrestrial experiences. But I was wrong about that.
Boy, were you ever. And Barbara, I just have a question for you about this. So first of all, who was it that you went to for your regression in order to remember that? Who do you, yeah.
Well, it was a wonderful woman who had gone through the past life regression training with me years earlier. And I had regressed her a couple of times, and she had regressed me to past life experiences. And I trusted her. I knew she was very good at doing that kind of regression work. And so we swapped services. I think I did something for her in regard to her deceased brother, and then she gave me a regression in term.
I was curious about that because, of course, you are such an experienced regression therapist yourself. I bet people wonder, who do you go to? So when you brought that up, I just wanted to ask. The other thing is, my ears pricked right up when you said that you went through the corner of the room where the ceiling meets the walls. That is really interesting the first thing that came to mind is two things, and I want to ask you what your take is on this whole pattern of people having experiences where they go through the corner where the ceiling meets the walls. That seems to be not common, but a bit of a pattern. I've heard that before. And so what I'm curious about is, first of all, why do you think that's a pattern? And secondly, do you think it has anything to do with it being a triangle?
Oh, well, I've never really given much thought to that. Most of the people whom I regress are aware of what they say. They're just going through the wall,
Okay.
in some cases going through the closed window, not necessarily the corner. I remember when this happened to me, I thought at the time, oh, I've never heard of anybody going through this kind of corner, although I had heard them going through the wall. But since then, I've heard of a few others who have
Yes.
come through where two walls come together with the ceiling, and maybe there's a special energetics about that kind of call it three different surfaces coming together. Um, I really don't know what the reason is, but I do know that that's where I went through, and I was surprised at
That's
the time. That's where I was going through.
That's definitely interesting. I mean, it seems to be, not to get into it further, but just to kind of emphasize it for the audience a little bit if they want to do their own searching into this. I've heard about this corner of the ceiling and the walls thing in a number of different contexts. So extraterrestrials or other kinds of paranormal experiences, but also frequently that it's some kind of portal. It's like an entry or exit way, that
Yes.
particular point. So that's kind of interesting. I'm curious what the physics would be behind that. But anyway, we can Google about it.
Another thing that is so interesting about these experiences, although it didn't happen to me, but I've heard many people report it, that it seems like the beings who visit them come out of the closet. That's a very typical report by people who experience these things. So maybe somehow the closet is a portal.
Isn't that interesting? Like Narnia. Remember the Narnia series? The girls
Yes.
go into the wardrobe. I mean, the children go through the wardrobe. That's another theme. Interesting.
Yeah.
More Googling to do.
Right. Yes, if you can get stimulated to do any of this research, that's absolutely wonderful, I think. So
Hmm.
the next experience, which I completely did not expect, was in 3 years later in 1997. And the circumstances were that I was in California where I was living, and I happened to be up in the Santa Barbara area Friday night for a meeting, a UFO meeting at a restaurant. And I was very excited because some of the very well known people in the field were there. And around midnight, I got into my car, locked all the doors. I made a real point of locking the doors because I had 2.5 hours to drive to get home that late night. And I wanted to be safe in my car. So I know that I locked the door. I made a point of it. Um, Turned on the motor, started getting on the freeway to drive home, going south from Santa Barbara, the 101 freeway, which is a pretty major freeway. And the first thing I noticed after a very few minutes was that there was no traffic on the freeway. No cars ahead of me, no cars coming up the other way, no cars behind me. And I thought, well, that's really strange because it's only around midnight and this is a major freeway. Surely there would be people coming up from Los Angeles towards Santa Barbara, which is a beautiful place to visit for the weekend. And yet there's no traffic at all. That's weird. Well, I guess I'm all right. So I just kept on driving. And then I noticed that off the coast, I was heading south and the Pacific Ocean was to my right. The freeway was right along the coast. And I noticed that over the ocean, suddenly there was big round flash of light that lasted just that long. And I thought, well, that's weird. A perfectly round circle of light looked like it was white with slightly greenish edges. And I thought they couldn't be lightning because lightning is a more diverse flash of light over the sky. But this is a very definite circle. And then it blinked out. I thought, well, that's really weird. No traffic and that weird circle of light over the ocean, not terribly far away. Well, I guess it's all right. I'm not just going to keep driving. And then I noticed that on my left there were a series of hills and a big arc of light showing above the top of the hills. The arc of light seemed to go on for maybe half a mile or maybe a mile or so as I was driving along. And I thought, well, that's really strange because I had been on that freeway many, many times, and I had looked at the map of that area many times, and I knew that there was no town over there. So I was puzzled as to why there was so much light over there when it didn't seem like anybody lived over there. There wouldn't be any street lights if there was no town. Oh, well, I'll just keep on going. And I was thinking, this is really a strange night, but I guess I'm okay. So then I came to see just slightly ahead of me, half on the freeway, half off the road on the edge of the freeway, there seemed to be what I assumed was a big silver trailer truck. And it seemed to have some light shining around the bottom of it, at the back end of this truck, I thought. And there were people walking around the back end of the truck. So I just assumed that the truck had, well, first of all, I assumed it was a truck, which it turned out it wasn't, but I assumed it was a big silver truck and big trailer truck, and that it must have had a flat tire and people must have put up flares and they were walking around the back in order to replace or fill up again the tire. That's what I assumed. So I drove past the truck. It slowed down a little bit so I wouldn't hit those people. And I realized as I was driving past, this is a really incredibly long truck. This is the longest truck I've ever seen. And just when I got to the very end of it, suddenly, right outside my windshield was a big light, bright, peachy pink colored light, and some sort of strip stretched across the windshield on an angle, and it made a crack in the windshield. So in 1 second, there was the light, the stretch thing, and the crack right in front of my face in the windshield. It was sort of a spider web shaped crack. And I was really worried about it. I mean, what if it would blow in on my face as I was driving home? So I was going to slow down and stop and back up and talk to those people who were walking around the back end of the truck and say, hey, what's going on? Look at my windshield, it's cracked. And see if I could hold them responsible. But a very insistent voice in my head, not my voice, said, no, don't slow down, don't stop, don't drive back. Just keep driving, driving, driving all the way home, which is what I thought that I did. However, in the meantime, I was taken in my car, the car and I, a nice Subaru wagon, were taken up in a diagonal beam of light and then up into something and sort of slid onto the floor of what looked like a very plain room. It looked like kind of an oval shaped room. I assumed it was kind of like a garage. There wasn't anything in it. It was sort of a tannish color, the floors and the walls, curved walls. And as soon as the car slid to a stop there, about 20 or 30 little beings, little short beings, came rushing toward my car from all directions, from behind, the sides, in front, and they were climbing all over the car. There were some right up on the hood of the car looking in the windshield. They were all around the sides of the car looking in the window, through the back window, and there were even a couple up on the roof of the car looking down, upside down through the windshield at me. And I just thought they were so cute. They all looked just exactly alike. And they were really small, probably, oh, I don't know, 3.5 feet, maybe 4 feet tall at the most, and very thin. And they were all kind of a bluish gray color. Their heads were much bigger than their little necks looked like they could support them, and no hair, big eyes that looked like a very deep blue, and these little spindly bodies. And they were very active and very curious. And I thought they were really cute and funny. I was just, I wasn't scared. I was just so amused at how curious and active they were, and climbing all over everything and wanting to come into the car. Well, even though I had locked the doors, all of the doors of the car, they somehow opened the passenger seat, two of them, and they came in, sat in the seat, sat right on top of my purse and my little peppermint candies I had to keep me awake on the drive. They were just sitting on the seat. They just sat right on that, and they, all the others were looking in the windows, and two opened, even though it was locked, my driver's door, and sort of ushered me out. Seemed like an effortless thing, just almost like just sucking me out. And then they came around me, a few of them, and they had their hands in the area of my armpits, but I don't think they really touched me. They just floated me upright across that room and through a door into another room. And when we went into the other room, I noticed that there was a platform in the middle of that room, and a column going up from the platform. And at the top of the platform, I mean, the top of the column, it seemed like there was a silver looking helmet, kind of a beehive shaped helmet that was just sort of hanging up there. Looked like it was metal. It looked like it was different metal plates. And anyway, it was just sitting there. I just noticed it, and they ushered me over up onto the platform and into a chair that was sitting there attached to that column. And it was a very straight back chair, straight arms, nothing comfortable about it whatsoever. In fact, it reminded me of an electrocution chair
Oh,
we have in our prisons,
oh gosh.
be electrocuted. But I mean, that's what it reminded me of, just very straight and hard, no nonsense, nothing cushy about it whatsoever. And then they seemed to click me in like a seatbelt type of thing. And then they all gathered around, like forming an apron around this platform and around where I was sitting. They were all looking at me. And in the meantime, I could feel that there was, they had brought down the helmet thing and fit it in, especially around my temples, and I could feel that there was a current similar to an electrical current going through my head from this helmet thing. And it wasn't hurting, but I certainly was very curious about it. And the beings were standing there looking at me and elbowing each other out of the way so they could get a closer look at this human who is sitting there. And they were around the sides of me and all around the front. And then after a couple of minutes of that, and I was just as fascinated looking at them as they were fascinated looking at me. And then I noticed that behind them, a little further away, maybe about 15, 20 feet at the most away, was a very different being, a very tall, totally white being, as white as paper is white, and seemed to have some kind of long white clothing on. And he was a very different being, very tall, very thin, very long, thin neck, and no hair, and had big eyes that kind of were like a rectangle with curved corners, totally black, and just hardly any sense of a nose or mouth. But he seemed to be looking at me. When he noticed that I was seeing him, he said, "Ah, Barbara, you probably wonder what we're doing," referring to that current. And I said, "Yes."
Did he actually say this? I mean, did you see a mouth moving and a voice coming out? Was it in your head? Is this all telepathic? How is this happening?
Yeah, it was all telepathic. I didn't see that little bit of a mouth move at all, nor did I hear a voice, but somehow I was hearing him in my own mind, hearing him very clearly. And it's different than hearing with our ears, but it was still very, very much that he was communicating with me. So he said, "You're probably wondering what we're doing." And I think I must have nodded or did something. He said, "First of all, I want you to know that we are not harming you in any way. We are simply taking information from your mind. And then in this regression, which is why I know all these details, I was being regressed by Dolores Cannon, who also very much incredible amount of excellent regression work. And
Yes.
she said, "Barbara, ask him what they're doing with this information they're taking from you." And he had also said, don't worry about this. We're not erasing your memories. We're just taking the information and leaving your memories intact. We're taking information from all the people you have done regressions with about their experiences with other beings from space." And then
Interesting.
Dolores started at saying, "Barbara, ask him what do they do with this information?" So I asked, and he said, "We broadcast it." And then Dolores, regressing me, said, "Barbara, ask him who listens to the broadcast." And he immediately answered and said, "Anybody visiting from space who is interested in what happens with people who have experiences with us visitors. Some of them want to know that information and some of them don't. And but those who do will tune in to the broadcasts." And then Dolores said, "Barbara, ask him, how do we broadcast this?" And he said, we use signals like you do too, with television, radio, shortwave, other broadcasts, that you tune into specific signals. And that's what we do. And those who come close to Earth and who want this information, they make a point of tuning into the correct signal. And
It's
those
almost
who
like it's an
hear information just do not tune into the signal.
like it's an intergalactic podcast, right? If you want to listen to it, you can tune in. If you don't want to, it's not the podcast for you. Wow.
He went on to say, it's like you here on Earth, you tune into a radio program or a television program that you're interested in, but you don't tune into those ones you don't care about. It's the same sort of thing. And then he said, she, meaning Dolores, does not have to ask questions through you, Barbara. She can just ask them and I will hear them and I will answer them. And I am perfectly willing to do that. So from then on, for the next almost 2 hours of this regression, she asked one question after the other. And he apparently, somehow, we don't know how this works, but he could hear those questions, even though this regression was to an event that had happened 3 weeks earlier in our time. He would hear them and give her a full answer. So that's what the rest of the session was about. While in the meantime, this information about experiencers' encounters was being, a copy was being made of that information in my brain, and they were able to keep the copy. So that's what the whole session was basically was Dolores's questions and his answers. And at the end of that time, he said, if you would like more information, because suddenly her tape on the tape recorder finished and made a snap sound. And she looked at her watch and realized she had some other engagement that she had to get to. So he said, well, if you would like more information, you can just get together another time, do what you did today, and I will answer any questions that you have. So you might think of some questions that you would like me to answer, and I'll be very happy to do that.
That is just amazing.
That regression, and Dolores and I did get together 2.5 months later when she came to Los Angeles. We had another regression, and this time she had a long list of questions already written out, and I gave her my long list of questions. So that's what that session was about, the same setting, same place, the same little beings, the same tall being, the same apparatus around my head, same electrical current. and he answered all of these questions. So Dolores has written most of that material in the last 2 chapters of her book, which she was just finishing at that time in 1997, her book called The Custodians. And she asked me Bonnie, the investigator, instead of Barbara, the psychotherapist, because at that time, I just was not ready to, have it publicly known that I was having these experiences too.
Mm-hmm.
Although I certainly had not had the regular pattern that most people have had, people who've had extraterrestrial encounters. And that is that for most people, these encounters begin very, very early in life, even in infancy, even in life in the mother's womb, and all through childhood. And I had had no indication whatsoever that that sort of thing had been happening for me.
You still feel that way, right? You still feel that you did. Okay.
Still had no memories or hints, indication, markings, scars, anything that, I had anything like that happen earlier in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think perception was that I really, really meant it when I asked to be taken for the making of a crop circle. So I think that that first experience, the crop circle experience, I'm just guessing this, that opened the way for other beings in space to know about me, and that I would be willing to have experiences like this. This is just a guess on my part, because two other experiences happened after that. The next one happened in the early 2000s, when one afternoon, when I was alone in my house, I was walking from my study. I was going to go through the living room to another part of the house. And when I came into the living room, I noticed that somebody was there, standing in the middle of my living room, which in an instant I thought, well, that's really strange, because I know I keep my doors locked, especially when I'm here alone in the house, as I was at that particular day. And not only was there somebody there, but it was a big reptilian male being standing right there. And even more surprising to me was that this reptilian male, looking very physical and three-dimensional, real in that sense, that he seemed like such a nice guy. Now, before that, I had heard lots of reports from other people's experiences in regressions. I'd heard lots and lots of reports of reptilian beings. And for the most part, the people who experienced them were very frightened of them, because they were big, they were imposing, they seemed powerful, they seemed arrogant, and sometimes they did things that people didn't like. Sometimes they were okay too. Some people had positive experiences with reptilians, but there was enough out there in reports, including in my regression work, that made people think that reptilians were really to be feared and avoided. But this reptilian standing in my living room just seemed like a really nice, safe, wonderful guy. Somebody it would be really fun to know. It wasn't that he was smiling. I never really saw his mouth. It might have been down around his chin. I'm not sure, because I never did see it.
Hmm.
But he was just exuding this wonderful vibration of likableness. And I went right over to him, and he had his hand extended in a handshake position. I went right over to him, took his hand, and we stood there together, holding that hand together for a few minutes, probably 5 or 6 minutes.
What did his hand feel like? What was the texture? What was the feel?
Well, I was mostly aware of feeling the palm of his hand, holding his palm, and it felt, well, the main thing about the hand is that it felt like it was a little bit thicker than our human men's hands. Otherwise, it felt very much like a man's handshake. Um, it didn't, people have asked me if it felt cold or hot or warm. No, just a neutral temperature. I didn't notice anything different about that. And I didn't really do anything to feel the backside, where there was undoubtedly much more texture than there was on the palm of his hand.
Mm-hmm.
His hand, if anything, a little different, might have felt like leather, smooth leather, but smooth.
So
Yeah,
not scaly, but leathery. Okay.
not his hand. I think the back of the hand would have been more of a reptile type of texture. So anyway, I was standing very close to him, looking up at these beautiful, totally round eyes that were a bright yellow and a bit shiny. They reminded me of beautiful yellow marbles. And they had um, pupils in them that were vertical rather than round. And they had a little jog in them, like like the way we draw a lightning strike.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
They were both like that, vertical with this little jog, black, and then the blue, the beautiful round yellow eyes. And while I was looking at his eyes, which were very fascinating to look in, and I felt very much seen by him, he was looking right at me in my eyes, but with the peripheral vision, I could see the shape of his head, and see lots of different colorings, lots of greens, a various shade of green and brown, kind of a small mottling of colors, greens and browns. I remember sienna brown was one of them here and there. And it definitely had a texture, but I detected more of a bumpy texture, like round bumps rather than scales. I didn't ever see anything that looked like scales, which is probably just as well because I never wanted to touch snakes and our reptiles that have scales on them. But this guy, even though I had always been totally avoidant of snakes or lizards or any reptile kind of being that we have on Earth, um, but this guy just seemed so safe and likable that there I was, just perfectly happy to be holding his hand and looking into those eyes. So then he started talking to me telepathically, and he explained that he was there um, to give me my own experience of knowing that there are beings from elsewhere who come. And that's why he chose to come in the light of day when there was plenty of sunlight coming into my living room from a big set of corner windows. And he said, it's important that you know that you see me, you know that I am here, and you know it in the light of day when you're perfectly awake and alert and absolutely aware that this is happening. And he said, we beings from elsewhere, he used that term quite a few times, beings from elsewhere. He didn't say extraterrestrials or aliens like we might
He
say.
didn't
He
give a
just
specific location either. He didn't say I'm from. Okay. Hmm.
he didn't. And I didn't ask him anything. I was just so fascinated with what was going on. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't ask anything. And I wasn't even wondering that. I was just so immersed in the experience and how real this was, that this was really, really happening.
Hmm.
And so he said, I have been sent to you in particular because we know that when you are working with people who do have experiences with those of us from elsewhere, we know that when you're doing the work, you are totally with it, totally accepting of it, totally believing of it, which is true. We also know that when you go away for a month or so to some other part of the world, which I was doing a lot in for many, many years, going to many other countries in the world, and then going every summer for a month of crop circle research. He said, you know, we know that when you're away doing something completely different, focused on something very fascinating to you there on the earth, we know that once in a while you have the thought in those circumstances, you have the thought that, oh, I wonder if this is really, really, really true, what all these other people I work with have experienced. And then you forget the thought, you go on with whatever you're doing. And we also know that when you come back and do that work again with people who experience those of us from elsewhere, that you are very accepting, very open, very believing of it. But since you have those occasional thoughts when you're away, we wanted to give you your own experience when you're conscious, awake, alert, in the middle of the day, lots of light, and that you know that this is true. I am representing that this is true. And
Wow.
they say, so this must have gone on, you see, for a few minutes. He went on to say that he had been especially bred to be a friendly ambassador, to come to Earth and to validate for people that the experiences that they were discovering that they had with beings from elsewhere are really real. There really are beings from elsewhere, as you humans think of it. And so sometimes will come when a person is standing and looking in a mirror, and one of us will come up from behind the person just until the person sees us, and then we disappear. Or we even come up when a person is driving a car. And he said, in your cars, you have a mirror that faces backwards. And I think the only thing that I said in my own mind is, oh, yeah, that's the rear view mirror. I said, we'll come up from behind the driver's seat until the person sees us in that little mirror. And as soon as the person sees us, we'll disappear. We're just there to quickly, simply validate for the person that the experiences that they think are real, maybe have some brief memories of flashes of memory, that we really do exist. We really are real, and we really do come here for some people. So
Wow. That's so beautiful. I mean, it reminds me of what you were saying about the mantis experiences also, right? That, someone could say, oh, look, it's a little mantis on my knee, and not paying any attention to the fact that they weren't, you're an avid gardener, you've never seen them in the garden before, all those other indications. They could think absolutely nothing of it, barely notice it, or they could realize that it's something special, and that there's a message that comes with that, which is, hi, we're here, and it just,
right.
this is a much more obvious example of, them doing that. But I mean, what a wonderful, generous, supportive, guiding gift for you. And you've had so many of those. I'm just adding this to the list. I mean, if people want more examples of the kind of guidance and support and direction you've been given by whoever, a variety of different beings, they should watch the other interviews we've done, because you really have quite a list. This is so gorgeous. And the fact that they did it during the middle of the day, as you were saying, with, sunlight pouring in through the windows, you can see him, you're not asleep, you've just walked into your own home and he's there. It's undeniable.
And still, all these years later, probably that experience probably happened approximately 20 years ago. But still, all of these years later, I can remember the feeling of that hand. And there have been two men in the years since then whom I have met and shaken hands with, two men whose hands reminded me very, very much of the feeling of that being's hand, because it was a little thicker and it had the same amount of give, and it puts a smooth palms. And I've actually commented on that to those men. The, the first man was one of the speakers at the International UFO Congress, and I met him out in the hallway and shook his hand and said, oh, this reminds me of the reptilian I had appear in my living room. And he said, "Oh, I don't know if I want to be likened to a reptilian." Not to tell him that it had been a very favorable, likable, positive experience for
Mhm.
me, reptilian. So anyway, after he had said what he wanted to say, and he certainly knew that I knew he was there, that we were having this actually personal, close encounter. Then suddenly, when he was finished, poofed, he was just gone, and my hand was just left there in the handshake position. And wow, where did he go?
Yeah.
And then I kept saying, that really happened, didn't it? I mean, really, he was just really here, wasn't he? Himself, you know, that he was really here. I was holding his hand and he was saying these things, and it all made so much sense. This really, really happens. I think for the next hour, as I did whatever I was doing in my home, I was just going over it again and again and realizing with each thought that yes, this I really had experienced this. This was not a delusion. I'm not a delusional person. I've
Mhm.
never had delusions. And I could still remember feeling the feeling of that hand. I think it was very good that I held his hand that long because that really emphasized the reality that he was actually there.
Oh my
Now,
gosh.
how he disappeared, I think he must have gone quickly into another dimension. Maybe he was even still there for a while. I don't know.
That's a good point.
Watching go over and over it in my mind and being absolutely amazed. Yeah, anyway, I certainly consider that a very positive experience and a learning experience too about how some of these beings will visit the people that they have encounters with to validate that, yes, indeed, they really do come. They really are real.
Mhm.
I think that was very, very useful. And then just a few years later, in 2008, I had my fourth and last experience that I am aware of. And the circumstances were that I was out sweeping my patio one very sunny afternoon. This was in 2008 in January. And I was going to have my experiencer group come the next day. So I wanted and they would get there during the late daylight. And I wanted the patio to look all nice for everybody. So I was out there sweeping, and what seemed like the middle of the afternoon, I suddenly needed to go into the house and use the bathroom. And I took a look around the sky and I thought, oh, good, there's plenty of sunlight. I'll just go and use the bathroom and I'll come out and finish sweeping. So I went in and used the bathroom. And when I was coming out through the hallway to go through the house and to the patio, I suddenly felt, and it was sunny, I could see the window opposite me, there's plenty of sunlight. I just suddenly couldn't move past a certain point. I could move, but it seemed like there was some sort of invisible force field that I couldn't move through in my hallway, although I didn't see anything. Well, that's the last thing that I consciously knew until about 2 hours later, I was still in the hallway and able to move through that force field that had been there, and noticed in the window opposite me that now, instead of being bright and sunny, it was completely dark outside. So I looked at my watch and I thought, oh my gosh, I think an hour and a half or 2 hours has gone by. Checked it with the kitchen clock. Yeah, it said that same time too. And I thought, whoa, boy. And I can't go out and sweep in the patio. It's too dark. I'll have to wait till tomorrow morning. So that made an impression on me. And then the experiencer group came the next late afternoon and evening, and they all told whatever they had been aware of since the monthly meeting before. And then I said, something really weird happened for me yesterday too. I told about suddenly, coming in during the sunlight and going out what I thought was a few minutes later, and it was completely dark, and this sort of feeling of an invisible force field that I couldn't move through. And one of the group members said, "Oh, Barbara, you've got to have a regression." And I said, "Yes, I'm planning to have my colleague who had regressed me before come. I'll try to arrange that as soon as possible." And then another member said, "No, no, regress yourself. Do it right now. We'll help you."
Oh,
And
wow.
one of the ladies in the group said, which I had not realized before, she said she had just finished a hypnosis course. They didn't emphasize about regression, but in that course, but maybe she could help me. And I said, "Well, oh, thank you so much, but I think I can do it myself." So sort of slid down on the couch that I'd been sitting on, rested my head against the pillows, did some deep breathing, and just went right into that experience that had happened the previous late afternoon. And what it showed was that when I got to that part of the hallway where I felt the invisible force field, that somehow I was sucked up. I don't know by what. I didn't see anything or anyone, but I was just drawn up through the ceiling, through the bedroom upstairs, through the roof, and then out over the house. And I was pleased to be over the house, surprised, of course, but pleased because I had always wondered how the different sections, different angles of the roof and the house fit together from the point of view of seeing it from ground level.
Huh.
And now I can see how it all worked together. I thought, well, this is wonderful that I get to see. I've always been curious about this. And then I was drawn up higher so that I could see my whole neighborhood and the curved pathways and the lawns and the swimming pool and the trees and the gardens, very pretty. And oh, that's what it looks like from above. Oh, that's really lovely. I'm glad I had the chance to see this. And then I was drawn way, 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 way up, very fast. Again, nothing around me, no being accompanying me that I could see, just a feeling of being drawn up by something. And I noticed that as I was getting way up there, that I was heading toward what looked like a big, big round ball of peachy pink cotton candy. Looked like that texture of cotton candy.
That's
And
interesting. You described a peachy pink light on the freeway with that very strange long truck as well. Huh.
same kind
Okay.
of color. I don't know why that color. I've never heard anybody else report it, but that's what I saw both times. And so I was drawn up and then into that. It was didn't feel like anything going into it. I think, by the way, this must have been an astral experience, and that was an astral sphere. This is just my thinking about it, and then I was so drawn up into the bottom of it, and then landed upright with my feet on the floor, but I didn't feel any floor.
Okay.
And all around me was this peachy pink, beautiful color of fuzzy, sort of fuzzy stuff. which was this craft. It certainly wasn't hard and metal, that's for sure. And so I was just getting used to it being there. It was so pretty. The colors were so gorgeous. And there was light in there from all around. I didn't see a source of light. And then I noticed that maybe about 15 or so, 15, 20 feet in front of me was a whole lineup of tall, thin beings who seemed to be almost transparent. I could just see the outlines of them between them. They all seemed to be right next to each other, maybe about 10 or 12 of them. And I could see, seemed like I could see through them to see these peachy pink colored walls, shall we say. And I noticed that these beings seemed to be very, very tall and very, very thin. And yet they had heads that were sort of shaped like a bulb.
Okay.
And I wondered if these might be the very lovely beings that one of my male regression clients had described as the beings he loves so much. The spring onion people, he called them. These were like the green stems of the spring onion and the white bulbous head. So these looks very similar to what he described. And thinking about how much he loved those beings, I thought, oh, these must be wonderful beings. There's nothing to worry about here. They were just sort of exuding just a lovely, lovely feeling, a lovely energy. Their faces all looked alike. There was through the transparency and the peachy pink, they seemed to have eyes slanted up a little tiny indication of a nose and mouth, but it was mostly the eyes. And when they saw me, recognizing that they were there, then they all together kind of undulated their way forward toward me till they were probably more like about 8 feet in front of me. And then they started talking telepathically. And the subject was all about the book which Nadine Lalich and I had just finished writing, a book called Alien Experiences. And it was based on her experiences and also on 24 other experiences that people in my regression work had experienced and had realized the details of in our regression work. So we had just finished the writing and editing of that and were sending it off for publishing when this event happened. So these beings were addressing that. They said, we are very, very pleased that you and your friend have finished writing your book. We are very pleased that you are bringing information out to anybody who will read the book about real experiences that people have with other beings like ourselves and others. And they went on to praise the book, and they kept saying, it's time for people to have this information. It's time for people all over the world to know that many, many of you are getting visited by beings from other locations, other types of beings. It's time that this becomes very publicly known. It's time that humans realize that this is normal, that you are being visited by other beings.
Mhm.
And so we are very, very pleased that you have written this book, which helps people to know. And then they went on to talk about me and Nadine Lalich. They said, you and your friend are a brilliant combination in coming together and writing this book. And then they told me about my abilities as they could see them. And they went on to a long list of her abilities, which are very different. I mean, she had computer skills. Had she was a whiz in typing. She was great at editing. And of course, she'd had a lifelong series of experiences with mantis beings and various other kinds of beings. And she had a hybrid child whom she met when the child was little and while the child was growing up. And now that the child was about 21 years old, was a young woman hybrid living on the ship. And so they went on about that particular the combination and how brilliant it was that the two of us in particular had gotten together to produce that book. So it was really a lovely experience with their thanking me very, very much. And then I think that that's all there was to that experience. And the next thing I knew, I was down again in my hallway, alert and awake, and just ready and able to move forward through the hallway and noticing through the window that it was completely dark outside.
Goodness.
That was a really lovely experience. I'm very, very pleased that I have it. Now, I have not heard anybody else ever describe a peachy pink spear there that looked like cotton candy.
Mm.
Um, I heard anybody describing these transparent beings that seem to be that same color, or maybe it's just that that color was showing through them. But I did hear previously of that man who had really loved to have visits from his spring onion people who sounded quite a bit like the ones that I saw. I don't know if they were the same ones or not. He also had experiences with beings with lab coats on, and he did not appreciate those visits.
Wow.
And come in right into his home, both of those kinds of beings. And often they would come during the daytime. He worked at home as a private investigator, and his wife would go out to work. And that's when most of his visits would happen right there during the work hours when his wife was away.
Goodness.
I love those beings. They were very sweet, just seemed so accepting and unconditionally loving. And of course, it was nice to get validation for the work that my friend and I had just done in putting that book, Alien Experiences, together.
That's wonderful. I mean, of course, it's in line with, so many things that we now have more information about, such as, you know, the wide variety of beings that are out there in this enormous universe. They're all shapes and sizes. They look like all kinds of different things, or they don't have bodies at all. And you've described many different kinds of beings, and though that makes sense to me that there would be that variety in a universe of indeterminable size, right, that is ever expanding. But then also the kindness and the support and um the kind of, yeah, the ongoing support. It's like they're watching you, they've been watching you, and they've been sort of tracking your progress and stepping in here and there when they felt like it was necessary to give you another kind of experience, or teach you something else, or borrow information from what you've learned, like you were describing as well. It's a really, I mean, even though you're saying you've only quote unquote had four that you can remember, I mean, clearly they're so involved in your life and so involved in
Yeah,
helping continue to find your direction and your motivation and making you feel encouraged and supported and,
Yeah.
validated in the work that you've been doing. That's really something else.
Yes, I feel very grateful for that actually,
Mm.
because there's so many people here who don't understand about these things. They don't think that this phenomenon is real. Um, and or they just don't really want to know about it. They're just not interested. Some of them definitely don't want to know. Don't tell me. I don't want to know about that.
Yeah.
Know about, but and I can't blame them for that because it's so different than what we're used to. It seems so bizarre, um, but it is really a great blessing to get that validation from some of the beings themselves.
No kidding. No kidding. And I mean, even if I'm thinking again about your listeners, the audience who is going to be listening to this talk, and the fact that many of the people that are coming to learn from you are people who have had their own experiences. And so, the more we hear, whether or not we've seen beings, whether or not we've met them, regardless of how our contact has appeared or has occurred, everyone needs to hear in this world, that these experiences really are real. They really are happening, that we are not crazy, even if they do seem bizarre, even if they are way too much for so many people who, again, I feel like you do, they don't want to have their paradigm turned completely upside down. I can completely understand that. It changes you and your life and your perspective forever. That's a really big thing to go through. But for those of us who really do want to hear these things, it is so important. The validation, the confirmation, the sharing of stories is so incredibly important. So,
Yeah,
I'm hearing so much value in what you're saying in this talk.
and
Mhm.
so many people who come to me for regressions express a lot of the thoughts that you have just expressed, that they've never had anybody to talk to who would really believe them and take them seriously about these things. And so much about it mystifies them. They might remember a little bit about a few encounters that began to happen, but then they don't know what happened in the whole experience. And they're so grateful to
Yeah.
have somebody to talk to who really accept what they say, take them at their word. And then, of course, the regression itself shows them and me, the reality of these things. So it's wonderful that it's opening up more now. There's more help available for people. There are online groups. There are um, experiencer groups at conferences. I've led many of those over the years. A lot is more is being written. I think new books are written every day about some aspect of this phenomenon. More people are coming forward and wanting to express what's happened for them. So I think it's growing slowly in awareness, and maybe there will always be people who do not want to know, or for some reason don't have the opportunity to know. Um, but that's all right. We're going at the pace we can go. And I think that the beings generally understand that. They know that we're very, very emotional, can have a lot of fears and insecurities, and
Mm.
that very strongly with our emotions. And that I think they understand that many people do not want to know about this. But I think they're also glad that more and more people are becoming aware of this part of reality. And I think that will be continuing to increase.
Oh, I think so too. How could it not, right? Because so many people, especially as this whole conversation about disclosure continues, there's so many people who feel like, yeah, I'm not sure, more and more that disclosure is going to come from government. But look at how many people are willing, average Joes, or people who've been in the military, or people who've been in the CIA, or people who have been, scientists, or I mean, people of all backgrounds, all walks of life, all different tiers of power and access are coming forward and saying the same things. So, we are really living at a time when this really is happening, and it's amazing. It is
Huh.
paradigm busting, it's confusing, it's awe-inspiring, and that's part of why I'm kind of fascinated by your experiences, Barbara, because you seem to just roll with it, whatever's happening. Oh, there's something that looks like an electric chair over there, I think I'll just go and sit in it. Or, oh, there's a reptilian in my room, in my living room, I'll just go up and shake his hand. You seem to be able to just walk towards these experiences without fear, and to trust, and to allow it to occur. And I hope that more and more and more people, as we become more open to this reality, are going to be able to do the same thing. I hope that more of us will be able to address this without fear, with openness, with curiosity, with the desire to meet other beings who share our galaxy and share our universe, who are part of this cosmos just like we are.
Yes. Well, and it's come into my awareness more and more over the years that many of us, maybe all of us, I don't know, but many of us have been other types of beings in some of our previous lifetimes.
I love that idea.
I'm meeting more and more people who have become aware of that, and that they know that they have a lot of contact in this life with the type of beings that they were once one of in a previous lifetime.
So cool.
Maybe not the most recent lifetime in some cases. Sometimes it was what seems like eons ago that we were a mantis being, or we were a dolphin like being, or we were an Andromedan or Arcturian or a Pleiadian or tall white or Zetas or small grays, or that probably billions of humans have probably had other incarnations as other types of beings. And we've also had many lifetimes being a human being here on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
That this whole span of perspective is opening up more and more to many of us. And I think that that is very exciting.
I agree. It's quite a time to be alive.
Oh, yes. I mean, probably in my last incarnation, which, as far as I know, was in the late 1800s and early 1900s, I don't think there was any talk about this sort of thing, any perspective whatsoever.
Mhm.
Um,
Only
it,
amongst the First Nations people, only amongst our Aboriginal people, our Indigenous people, they knew, and they've known for hundreds and hundreds of years. But to the average white person, or other racial groups as well, of course not. It would have seemed bizarre. And also, our culture and society was so based on religion as well. There was no room for that.
oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the research being done on the Bible and other ancient writings and ancient tablets in various cultures are showing that it certainly looks like other beings came here
Oh,
and
yes.
long, long, long ago, and people didn't necessarily know how to talk about that, so they depicted them in whatever way they did depict them. But now we can recognize that some of those ancient depictions were really talking about what we call extraterrestrials.
That's right. This is another terrific conversation that we probably need to have, Barbara. The origins of humanity and what you've discovered about that throughout your work and your life. Because yeah, there are so many amazing resources. I mentioned Paul Anthony Wallace earlier on. He is a favorite of mine. He's a pastor in Australia. He's an experiencer. He's written wonderful books about exactly what you just said. And, you know, I'd love to hear your take on it. So we should do a talk on that as well. But I think for now, we should leave everybody with the wonder of the experiences that you've had. And, you know, it is irrefutable proof. It's just irrefutable proof. You are one of many people who have had the direct experience of knowing that there are other beings in the universe. It just is a fact. And it's time, as your beings were saying to you, right? It's time again now. It was time then, it's time again now for all of us to know. So, Barbara, thank you so much again for being here to share your stories, because it's part of that goal, isn't it? You know, that it's time for everyone to know, and all of your work and your experience lends so much to that. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, everyone, thank you as well for listening and for following along with Barbara's life stories and her journeys and all of her expertise. Come back for more and keep leaving us your comments and your likes. We really, really appreciate that. And of course, look at the notes below to see Barbara's website link and the link for her books. And search her on the internet. You'll find lots of the wonderful talks that she's done as well. But please stay in touch with us and let us know what you think of these talks that we're doing. We really appreciate you being here to listen. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
You.